So I'm going to talk about what digital marketing or digital marketers can learn from the world of product management. So during the break, I was having a conversation and someone came up and said, what's your talk all about? Say specifically, what's this thing about product management and why we are having this conversation at a CRO and marketing event. So I think a little bit of context about why should you pay attention to me for the next 30 to 40 minutes is going to really help because your time is really valuable. So bit of history about me and why I'm talking about this is about 6 years back, I started Visual Website Optimizer, which is one of the market-leading A/B testing tools out there. And it was really my fourth attempt at doing a startup. So it's not like one day I got an amazing idea, I built Visual Website Optimizer, and it was a success. So I had 3 and 4 different startups before it, which failed. And that has a lot of context. This talk has a context on why that failed and what marketers can learn about it. But once the fourth one, which was Visual Website Optimizer, it clicked and it had a number of customers, we grew over the last 6 years. And right now we have about 4,000 plus paying customers. And the challenges with building the product and scaling it up and continuing to evolve it at 4,000 clients is way different from the challenges 6 years back when I had no customers at all. And that's the journey over the last 6 years, which I felt there's a lot of parallels in the way I've learned things about products, has the same parallels with marketing, where initially we're just figuring out what works, what doesn't work. But ultimately in the evolution, once it started working, the challenges become way different. So product marketing is a discipline as far as for definition's sake. It's how you manage the product. And managing the product is something I learned very recently. There's a whole branch of product management. And in fact, about 6 or 7 months back, we hired our first product manager, and we have now 4 product managers in the team. But really, 1 year back, I didn't even know there was a term called product management, or there's a role specializing in product management. Because it was just us engineers trying to find out how to evolve the product. But as I learned more and more about how product management works, I found out that the processes can be directly applied, and I was implicitly applying them to the way VW was marketed. And that's what this talk is about. So before we begin, I just want to do a quick poll and just see who has heard of this term called lean startups. Oh, great. So almost everyone. And who has heard of this term Agile? Okay, again, just like everyone. So that's great. I guess then my job will be much easier. So like I was saying, this is my just a very big meta learning that marketing is almost equivalent to product management. So whatever we learn in marketing can be applied in product management, and whatever we learn in product management, the way products are built and scaled, can be applied in marketing, and these two fields can really help each other. So I'm going to spend some time on this slide and maybe contextualize it to the way VW was built and scaled. So this is just very broad 30,000 view of how products are built and scaled. The first stage really is the ideation stage. So there's a hunch, or maybe there's a few data points where you feel there is like an opportunity for a product. But there the problem is that it's an unknown product. And when I say unknown product, all you have this is vague idea in the air that it could be something, but you don't know what's the nitty-gritties of it. You don't know is it going to be like 3 screens, 4 screens? It's just in the air. And the market is also unknown. Again, I've realized in the 6 years when I was starting out, VW was just for very savvy marketers who want to do quick and A/B testing. But right now, across 4,000 clients, just way different types of customer sets. The needs and problems of an agency customer is very different from needs and problems of an enterprise customer. So when you're just starting out, it's not even known what's the product, what's the market. And there's a very high risk of building something which nobody wants. So at the initial stage, your cost is not the cost of your time or money. I think the biggest cost right upfront when you're building a product is the opportunity cost. And this happened to me in the first sort of 3 startups I tried doing, and the 4th one before VW, where I wrote code for the entire platform for 8 months and nobody really wanted it. And because I thought I knew what I was building. I thought I knew the market. And the mistake I did was to get in a room, code for 8 months, and come out with something which I thought would be magical, but nobody really cared about it. Uh, but once you've built the product, again, the next stage, once you have a very fair idea of that there's a valid market opportunity, the product is still unknown. And I say so because even though I realized that A/B testing was a valid market opportunity 5 years back, because there was Google Website Optimizer, which everybody was complaining about, but there was still in a product thousands of variables that you need to tweak, even as simple as a thing of whether it should have 5 screens in onboarding versus a single screen on onboarding, whether you should focus on simplicity or whether you should focus on features, or just number of variables, which even a couple of them go wrong, people can just end up ignoring whatever you've built. So even with this right opportunity, still the product is unknown, and there is at this stage high risk of building an undesirable product. So the market is right, but the product is undesirable. But once you've figured both these things out, then this stage comes of refining, where you've got the right product, the right market, but the problem becomes of unknown optima. You might have something that works, like for example, initially with VW, once it started getting lots of customers and users, again, there was no way of knowing, is this the best, which could it be, or whether it has somehow just been working. So the problem definition changes from unknown product, unknown market, to really optimizing it. And I see parallels in marketing, where initially with any marketing campaign or even for CRO projects, this follows the same sort of curve, where it evolves from knowing what to do to doing the right thing and then doing it in the optimal way. And the reason I talked about lean and agile is because it just maps very nicely to the evolution curve of how you do stuff. So very early on, when you're building stuff where there's lots of variables which are unknown, the lean way of thinking is really helpful. And I say lean way of thinking and not lean way of doing, because doing and optimizing is something which comes way later. And agile helps you execute in a very good way, while lean helps you think in a very good way. So lean thinking is something you can apply to practically anything. So what lean tries to answer is how to find a thing that works in this world out there. And that thing could be a product, thing could be a marketing campaign, or that thing could really be a design or even a CRO project. That's why you hear terms so often, lean startups, or you hear terms like lean design, or you even hear terms like lean analytics. So the reason why lean is slapped onto so many things is because it's just a way of thinking on finding and sort of isolating unknown variables and learning about them in one way or the another. So I'm going to lay out just a number of very broad principles, and happy to just splinter a little bit of examples with them as well. But this is how I think lean thinking works. So again, I think this point has been repeated in a number of talks before this, but I'll still reiterate on why hunches are not knowledge and they're a source of assumptions. So lean, everywhere you talk about lean design, lean analytics, everywhere they emphasize that the way you work is really to think the world as a list of assumptions. So whatever you think you know, it's better to treat it as an assumption until data has proven otherwise. And so in context of, say, building new products, if I got a sense that Google Website Optimizer was really hard to use, I could have just jumped in and built a new product the same way I did with my 3 previous startups. But it was important for me to think that it's an assumption. So it forces you to be really humble in the sense of not thinking you know everything. And so that's the first, that you really ought to think that the world behaves in a way you are not aware about. And those are really your assumptions that are just waiting to be proven. And second, lean asks you to prioritize whatever you think about the world in terms of most risky to less risky. And the reason it's important is because you don't want to start in a very randomized order and start just testing your assumptions in one way or the another. If you have 4 assumptions about a new product or a new marketing campaign or whatever, it's really important to prioritize in terms of what is the most riskiest assumption that can kill your entire project if it's proven to be wrong. And it's very important because you're limited in time and resources to focus on the riskiest assumptions first and then move on to less risky. Because I see whenever we are doing a new thing, and I use thing in a very specific, explicit way, because it could be a design, it could be a product or anything, there's a tendency to just jump into things and start implementing them right away. Or even with CRO, there's a tendency to just start testing in a randomized order. But it could be that whatever is the riskiest assumption is like the 5th thing you are testing, and that sort of wastes your effort for the 4 things. It's also simply saving money and time if you got all of the other things wrong. So in terms of product, for example, if your product assumes that there's a new need for a new startup because of these 4 things are wrong, what is the most wild assumption you have made about the world? It could be that I had made assumption about product being easy, or product being cheap, or product being XYZ. Or if you stack them up, which one is the riskiest ones you should go out and fix first. And the third principle for lean is really to design experiments for maximum learning in shortest amount of time. So there's a term, like everyone of you must be aware about, minimum viable product. And it forces you to sort of test the riskiest assumptions or a bunch of risky assumptions in one particular package and not go out and build the entire product and hope for the best. And fourth and the final principle for lean is really to learn from the data and quickly decide whether you want to abandon or tweak project. So even this is important in terms of having being really honest to know that all of your assumptions or some of your assumptions have been really wrong. So at that point, the lean startup world uses this term called pivot, which is very fancy and it's very sort of in fashion. But sometimes it's just helpful to just abandon the project. It's a sunk cost. But there is where a good judgment comes in, where you sort of say that these were the 4 riskiest assumptions I had. And out of these 4, the 3 have proven to be invalidated. So I can't really build the product on just 4th assumption alone, which is true. So I'll rather just abandon this whole thing. So it forces you to be have like this is like overall framework of getting a better ROI, not just in terms of money, but in terms of effort, because you spend relatively less amount of time in terms of learning what works and what doesn't work. So that is, if you take design, for example, or if you're doing a UX design, the same principles, 4 principles can be sort of applied to it. If you're doing a usability study or whatever, you will list your assumptions that this is how you think your users interact with the design. And then you would find out which is the riskiest one. And then you would build very minimal experiments to just shoot them down one by one and learn about them. And finally, you would decide whether you would abandon this redesign or usability design or whether you would tweak. So that's the way you think about it. Now, I was trying to think what parallels does it have to marketing and CRO. And this has been my implicit learning over the last 6 years. I just made them explicit in terms of if there is a lean startup, could there be a thing called lean marketing or lean CRO? And this is what I think would be a good way to think about it. Like, first is you could list assumptions of what drives your users. So CRO is all about trying to match the motivations of your users with what you're presenting on a page. It's as simple as that. But a lot of times we think we know the assumptions of our users really well, but it could be very helpful to just write everything you know why your customers come on the landing page and why they sort of purchase from you, right? And So you could have a list of like 5, 6 different things. It could be that you have a strong brand, and that's what you think you have a strong brand. And it could be about price, it could be about trust, it could be about quality of products. There can be hundreds of assumptions why people come and buy a product. And you can simply ask them as well, why do you think you buy and come? But again, that is not a validated data until it's like you've done a test to prove or disprove it. So once you have assumptions, you can actually sort those assumptions by primary motivators. So again, this is a good way to think about what tests should you be doing. If you have assumptions like people convert or buy from us because of price, because of trust, or because of social proof, you put the primary motivators up and secondary motivators in second. And the third is something I just made up, which is like minimum viable campaigns. You design minimum viable campaigns to test those assumptions. So if you have 5 or 6 different assumptions on why people come on your page and convert, you have to. And minimum viable campaign is really, it consists of a low cost and low effort campaign, not for getting traffic or not for making money, but it's to learn something about the world on how your customers behave. And it's really about learning rather than increasing your business, right? And fourth is like you analyze the results to validate or invalidate your hypothesis. So I'm going to dig into somewhat more details on what I think minimum viable campaigns could look like. So again, when we think about marketing campaigns, there's 2 broad components. One is the acquisition and the other one is conversion. And again, it's very helpful to think of these 2 things in a connected way, yet they could be optimized in an isolated way. For example, if you have 2 assumptions that our customers buy from us because we have a very good price, or the assumption is we have a very good quality. One way to test out this from a traffic source level is to just do a Google AdWords campaign. And whatever people end up clicking up most, your entire ad could be the same, and it could be emphasizing either the price or it could be emphasizing the quality. Whatever people end up clicking the most, that's what you'll learn, that the market out there of people who are not on the website, they sort of get attracted by one of these qualities. So after this is done, you've suddenly sort of converted your assumption into validated learning. And the second, once those people come on your site, again, it'll be not be wise to assume that whatever drove them to be on your landing page is the same thing which will drive them to convert. You still have to test those assumptions. Because it could be the case that once people have come from a marketing campaign to your landing pages, they sort of understood what your service is about, but still the nature of questions changed along the way. So even there, you can sort of test your different assumptions one by one, starting with the most riskiest one to the least riskiest one. And for example, you can have in the confirmation page or the product page emphasize price or quality. So you're testing both the marketing campaigns or traffic acquisition to the final conversions. And as far as sort of pivot, which is whether you should abandon or whether you should tweak is concerned, I think a good metric to make that decision for minimum viable campaigns is this cost of customer acquisition, which is really that how much money you pay to get traffic on your site multiplied with conversion rate. So if your cost of customer acquisition is profitable for you, that's like the best case scenario. And that is where I think it could, again, in a very structured way, it could be helpful to think whether you can increase the volume of the same traffic source from just wanting to do learning to sort of now actually getting real business. So for example, if your budget was $100 to just to learn whether a specific assumption is true, you can increase it to $10,000 because now cost of customer acquisition is very profitable for you. And then you can find similar traffic sources and campaigns to attract similar types of visitors who have sort of that sort of affinity towards your pages. For example, if it worked for Google, there's a very high chance that it could work for like Bing as well. Because that is the search behavior for visitors. So if, and really it's a matter of creativity. That's where it comes into the picture, that you've found a set of audience that has an affinity towards your pages, towards price or quality. No, you're just trying to find a similar sort of audience at other places. And then you go on and test secondary and tertiary assumptions. So, for example, the primary assumption or the main motivator, if it's price, for some segments it could be true that quality is there. So with conversion optimization programs, a lot of time it happens that first, if we've gotten the main result well optimized, the secondary results just get ignored because we very quickly move on to different campaigns. But there could be sort of a, a price point, or there could be a certain type of ad that even is able to attract and retain the tertiary and secondary sort of motivators as well. So again, it's a matter of how much time and effort do you want to spend there. However, if the cost of customer acquisition or your entire thing ends up being unprofitable, again, it could be helpful to think of these two in a separate ways where you're acquiring the traffic and converting the traffic. The problem could really be the visitor acquisition, where your visitor acquisition could be very costly. Your ads might not be testing the right assumptions, or it could be conversions. So if you're able to isolate the problems and fix them in isolation, that's like always better. And that's why I also think as far as conversion optimization is concerned, it's always helpful to think in terms of where the traffic is coming from. Because whenever we are discussing tests, I rarely see that context of what is the source of the traffic. Because the source impacts the motivation of visitors so much. If it's from like Facebook, people might not be that much interested versus it's from PPC, or if it's direct, your brand does 90% of the job itself, where the role of the landing page decreases. So it's important to see in context of what's the motivation of the traffic and what's the landing page is doing while analyzing results. And so that is the lean way of thinking. And once you go beyond lean in terms of, so you have done these things and you found out that there are 5 marketing campaigns along with the relevant experiences or landing pages that are converting well, but you obviously can't just leave it at that. This is the same thing as starting a startup and you found initial traction, but after 1 or 2 years, you sort of, then really the main job starts where you have to scale it up. You can't really stop there. And so Agile is a way to execute stuff because earlier there is a lot of unknowns, and with later it's really about optimizing what's known. And Agile answers you that once you found a thing that works, how do you scale it and keep optimizing it soon, ROI. And again, thing means Agile could be applied to anything which needs to be optimized. And this is really the Agile Manifesto. I've just taken it from the website. Agile Manifesto is something that a lot of companies have signed, that this is the way they prioritize stuff, where they prioritize individuals and interactions on process and tools. And I'm going to sort of contextualize it in terms of marketing. So this is a new term called Agile marketing, which is really borrows a lot of principles from the Agile way of developing products. So what individuals and interactions over processes means that the ideas for marketing campaigns can come from anywhere. And when I say ideas, I don't mean you go ahead and implement it. It just means that an assumption for a valid traffic source and the relevant experience can come from anywhere. And that's what Agile emphasizes, that instead of the traditional waterfall model where things are really process oriented or things are very compartmentalized, that the ideas will only come from say customers, and product managers will take it and then engineers will develop it. The whole idea is that there is a common backlog, or there's a common repository where everyone pools in with their ideas and everyone sort of is involved in the decision making rather than just 1 or 2 people. And the second principle for Agile, which is applied to marketing, is really working software over documentation. Again, what this means is that that campaigns that produce results, they can be counterintuitive or unexplainable, and that's okay. So in software, that means that Agile emphasizes that software or products don't have to be sort of beautiful in terms of well documented and assuming that the world works in a certain way and the product will be in a certain way, because it changes so fast. So they emphasize that what's working right now, even if you're not able to understand it really well, that's okay, as long as it's working, versus trying to make a sense of it. And the fourth principle is really customer collaboration. So once your priority changes from knowing what works to optimizing it, being as close to customer is really, really important. And that's what we've learned with VW as well, which means that you have to involve users in every aspect of, say, even the marketing. So one thing with product which they do really well, product managers, they're very customer oriented. So for example, in our product management team, every week we'll have a customer meeting. We'll ask what drives you, what are you finding well or not. But I've seen this missing in the marketing departments. Nobody in the marketing is responsible for talking to customers every week. They would come up with creatives, they would come up with where to buy media, they would implement it, A/B test, but in this entire picture, nobody goes out and talks to customer whether this marketing experience is making sense for you or not. So why can't we involve customers in the same way in marketing as it's being involved for the products for a very long time? And the last is like Agile really emphasizes on responding to change versus following a plan. Again, this whole thing is that the world changes. When we started with VW, A/B testing and doing simple A/B testing was a very high priority. Right now, like that's a given for any new A/B testing tool. That's a given. So if you're just enamored by following a plan that this is what I think the world would behave, it can just change, beyond what you have thought about. So having the process of responding to a change very early on, it's important, not just for products, but even for marketing campaigns. You had set up a marketing campaign, a particular PPC campaign might have worked for 1 year, but a new competitor can emerge and just disrupt your entire marketing campaign in 1 week. If you're not sort of ready to respond really soon, that's like wasted effort and energy for you. So this is sort of like my hope that the marketing teams will also evolve to be agile, just the same way product management or engineering teams are agile, which really means having, again, this is something everybody talks about, that there should be a collaboration, but you can't do things like let's ask people to collaborate and hope they collaborate. In Agile, if you go and read Agile, you'll see that they have a very specific ways collaboration is sort of forced, where they have small teams that do sprint, which is 2 weeks of execution. They do sprint reviews and so on and so forth. And all of this lets this small team of 5 or 6 people talk about challenges and solve them in a very quick way. Again, this is something you can evolve in your organization as well, where designers, engineers, copywriters all can collaborate to sort of come up with and optimize marketing campaigns. And you also have to come up with a way where you're continuously incorporating customer input in whatever it's doing. Because one thing I've observed is that if we sort of put customer input as something that needs to be done before like an A/B test, or which is done in a one-off manner, the world could change around you and you wouldn't even notice. For example, if you're not continuously measuring the customer satisfaction over a long period of time, you wouldn't know like what was working for the first 3 months. They were really happy. Your tool could still be perfect, but the world around you could change. So it's really important to incorporate continuous customer input in whatever marketing campaigns you are doing. And again, this is very high level, and this is the last slide. I highly recommend you to go and search for this term agile marketing, where it borrows a lot of concepts from agile engineering or agile product management. But on a very high level view, it's about having a backlog, and backlog really means a list of things that you have to either test or execute, and then prioritizing, because you can't go do things randomly. And ultimately you execute, learn, and sort of go in that loop. And I think that's it. I'm done. Thank you.
So how do you validate feature requests? So, we have a bunch of features we want to implement. So how do we know which one is going to be useful, highly useful, useless?
So what we do and what we have started doing more and more is, instead of going ahead and putting in all energy into developing the full-blown product or the full-blown feature, we sort of take the features we think would be most important to a lot of users and actually start just doing those features in a very manual way in a lot of times. For example, if some customer says it will be really cool to have this specific data in VWO, what we will do is select 50 customers and tell them that this is the data you could get from VWO. Are you interested in it? And we'll not build a feature, but rather we'll just pull up that data and do it manually. Or for example, if people ask, it'll be really cool to prioritize test in VWO, we'll again select a random bunch of 50 users and tell them, hey, we'll give you an Excel spreadsheet to do it. Do you think it is a very useful thing? So we do select a random bunch of users who did not give us requests and ask them whether this will be useful before going and just building it full blown.
Any advice on how to encourage shared understanding amongst the team when testing marketing hypotheses? For instance, should we keep an archive of tested assumptions and so on?
Can you repeat the question?
So we have a bunch of assumptions in the company.
Yeah.
And how do we make sure that everybody in the organization is aware of all the assumptions that we have already tested and some that we haven't tested yet? So how to basically knowledge management about assumptions, how to do that?
Again, one of the ways we do is we have a shared Excel in our organization where anybody can put in the ideas they want to be tested either on the website or on the product. And again, the key thing is that whatever results of an A/B test we get, they are shared with everyone. And so it's very transparent whose idea was it and whose idea won or whose idea did not win. And sometimes we also internally do very exhibitionist sort of outcomes for a test or not, where, like, for example, two people bet on a test and whoever lost had to wear boxers in office. So this sort of transparency in results really starts having a grapevine in the office that, hey, CEO thought this would be really cool, but it sort of lost. And that lets people understand that it's about assumptions and not sort of validated hunches.
Are there any good platforms to incorporate customer feedback into analytics or other dashboards?
I think there's, on a continuous basis, I don't think I'm aware of a tool that can sort of poll your users in a very frequent way and sort of give you an index when the satisfaction is going down. So Net Promoter Score is one of the things you can try, but the key thing is not to do it just once, but to keep it running for a very long time where it samples 5 or 10% of users. So suddenly you can detect a drop in your satisfaction and do something about it.
What kind of books can you recommend about this stuff?
About Lean, I think the Lean Startup book is actually quite good. I'll actually recommend videos and not books. So on the Google Ventures website, it's called gv.com/library. They have these 2 videos which I really like. One is called Lean Analytics. It's an hour-long video, but the presenter takes you into very good way of how to think about analytics in a lean way. And the second is, I think it's called Agile Product Management or Lean Product Management. Again, it helps you think in a way of testing your assumption. And these 2 videos are quite good, actually.
And the last question, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of your Agile marketing team? Can you give sample KPIs?
The sample, I think 3 things are really important, and that's something, Pep, you also mentioned in your talk. One is the number of tests you're able to do per week or per month, whatever the unit of time you take, because it's just simple fact of the matter. The more number of tests you'll do, the more learning you will get. The second really is per test, what is the probability that you're going to get a winner? So if you are getting 1 out of 10 wins in a traditional way, if you implement Agile or Lean, are you getting 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 3? And the third one really is to see whether per test, what is the delta or increase you're getting. If you were getting on an average 5% increase, are you able to push it to 10% or not? Actually, this is something we intend to also sort of derive data on. So since we have 4,000 clients, one of the things I've been thinking about is let's have people self-select whether they do this thing in a tactical way or whether they do in an agile way, and see how do their tests differ. We'll really have a good amount of data and validating that agile works better probably in 6 months or so.
Thank you, Paras.
Thank you.